Today I want to tell you about my first drum lesson, my worst drum lesson, and the epiphany I had from that experience that has really informed every single drum lesson I've given since then. And I don't know what I ended up titling this video, probably one of those things, but you're getting all of that. So this is a good one for teachers and also useful, I think, for students that are interested in getting the most out of their lessons. All right, so the story of my first lesson and my worst lesson as a teacher, which, surprise, are the same lesson. Now, this goes back to when I was maybe 16 or 17, I started teaching, and very early on, I was really into music education, really into being a drum teacher. I knew that that was something I wanted to do very early on. So when I was 16 or 17, I started teaching my very first student, whose name is Justin. This is up in Juneau, Alaska. And my very first lesson that I was going to give, I was super, super excited. And I prepared heavily, and I had mapped out all this stuff that we were going to talk about. It was an hour-long lesson, and my thinking going in was, okay, in this hour, I am going to deliver as much value as possible. I'm going to pack in all the information I can to the shortest amount of time. I'm going to explain it as succinctly and as clearly as possible, and that is what's going to make great education. That's what's going to make a great lesson. So experienced teachers probably already see where this is going, but I show up, I'm super excited, and in my mind, I start mapping out like Stephen Hawking's theory of everything, but on drums. We start dividing all of your skill sets into these different categories, so groove and chops and feel and hand speed and foot speed and world grooves, all of this stuff. And I start talking about all these layers and all these methods to practicing all of these different things and sort of where he's at on all of those metrics and exactly what he should practice next. And then once he's done that, what he should practice after that. And then once that's starting to feel comfortable, he can try these 20 different variations with all of those 10 variations before that, right? So I am just compressing all of this information into such a relatively short span of time, into an hour. And to be fair, I think it actually was probably pretty good information, but the problem was I was just condensing 20 years worth of practicing, stuff that I couldn't do. I was even projecting ahead, stuff well beyond what I could play into this single drum lesson for, someone who is 13 or maybe 14 at the time. So the lesson ends, I drive away, and I am pumped. I'm thinking to myself, you just gave the best drum lesson that anyone has ever given on your first try. This is amazing. So I come back in the next week, I'm all excited. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he must have gotten so much better. I gave him all of this to do, and then I gave him all of this to do. And I say, how was practicing this week? And he goes, I was actually kind of busy this week, and I didn't really get much of a chance to practice. And in the moment, I was completely deflated. I was thinking, what are you talking about? You didn't get a chance to practice. Like, we just talked about the theory of drums, the universe, and everything last week, and you're saying you didn't really practice much? But of course, you recognize that the problem was me. The problem was not him at all. It was a completely unrealistic expectation to expect him to go through even a small percentage of what I had given him the week before. So the big takeaway for me then, and for us as music teachers, and for us as students as well, is that if you're taking private lessons, in most scenarios, you should only be giving, as a music teacher, 1 week's worth of stuff to work on. And you should be very aware of your student's situation, their skill level, what they're interested in, how much time they realistically have to practice, their motivation level, and what you give them should be very closely tied to all of those factors. So in that lesson with Justin, where I gave him 20 years worth of drumming to work on in a week, realistically, I probably should have given him maybe 8 different bass drum variations that would have helped him work on his coordination between his hands and feet. And the problem for me, and the problem I see in a lot of newer teachers, is that early on, you sort of feel guilty not giving a student enough to work on. You feel like giving them more to work on is adding more value. And especially if they're paying good money to see you, you feel like they should be getting as much from you as possible. But the truth is, what they're paying for is your eye and your assessment of their playing right now. And it's up to you to give them an appropriate amount of work for 1 week. And in most cases, that is less than you think it is. Because think about it, if you are a music teacher, you are unusual in the world of musicians. Most musicians do not practice or put as much time into working on exercises and improving their skills outside of a band as someone who's going down a music education path might. So you need to really temper your expectations and get a sense for how important drumming or guitar or whatever the instrument is in your student's life, and how often do they actually practice that thing? And when they do practice, what is their practice like? How much time do they spend working on exercises? How much time do they spend just messing around? And then work with them and meet with them where they are based on those factors. That is what they're paying you for. And it literally took me thousands of private lessons given to become comfortable with this sort of less is more approach. And if you're giving them a little bit to do and they're exceeding your expectations every single week, then you can start to scale up with them. Similarly, if you hired a personal trainer, you would be disappointed if they weren't telling you specific exercises to work on and a specific amount of weight to do in those exercises, or a certain number of reps that's based on you and your physiology at that point. And then their job is to sort of grow with you and scale what they're asking you to do week by week based on what they're seeing as far as your growth. The truth is that as music teachers, and especially as drum teachers, we're not going to give a student information that they couldn't find elsewhere. It seems like every lesson that could possibly exist does exist on Drumeo for free. So your value as a teacher is actually to cut through the noise and not give a bunch of extra information, but to take away all of the extraneous information, evaluate the student and say, I can see that your goals are this, and I believe that the most expedient way for you to get there is to practice these exercises. And this is how much I want you to work on this week based on what I know about you and how much you're able to practice. So music teachers, please learn from my mistakes, and students, take control of your own lessons as well, and don't be afraid to communicate with your teachers. And if they're giving you too much or if they're not giving you enough, help them calibrate for you. So hopefully that helps some of you. Thank you for watching. See you next time.